A faint signal echoed across the empty darkness of space, barely louder than a whisper. It carried a single desperate message. "We are being attacked, our cities are burning, our people are dying, please send help." No one answered. The ARX Dominion had swept across the world of Veen 4 with brutal force, destroying everything in their path. Their massive ships hung above the planet, raining fire down on the defenseless cities below. Their soldiers marched through the streets, crushing anyone who stood against them. The galaxy's ruling council heard the call for help and chose to do nothing. They talked about politics, about treaties, about acceptable losses. They would not risk a war with the ARX over a colony that meant nothing to them. And so the galaxy turned away. But the council had made a fatal mistake. Veen 4 was home to humans, and humans never abandoned their own. Suddenly, 500 warships jumped into existence from nowhere, forming a perfect attack formation. The council had believed humans were scattered and weak, unable to gather such power. They had been wrong. The greatest human warship, the Indomitable, led the way. On its bridge stood Admiral Elias Vance, his face like steel, his voice calm and steady as he gave the order that would change everything. Begin the attack and make them pay. Fire erupted across Veen 4's sky. The ARX had never feared humans. They saw them as clumsy, weak, primitive creatures struggling on the edges of the galaxy. But humans had spent centuries fighting each other, perfecting the art of war in ways no other species had ever imagined. While the Council had made rules against planetary invasions and total warfare, humans had ignored those rules. They had built ships for a war they hoped would never come, but had prepared for anyway. Now that preparation was paying off. The Indomitable's massive cannons roared, hurling building-sized projectiles at enemy ships. Their shields and armor crumbled like paper. Fast human scout ships weaved between the slow-moving ARX vessels, striking with precision. Drop pods fell like meteors, carrying soldiers in powered armor designed to withstand anything the galaxy could throw at them. They hit the ground running, moving like phantoms through burning cities. The ARX expected them to be slow and clumsy in their heavy suits, but instead they moved like creatures born for battle. They struck fast, struck hard, and pushed forward without stopping. Hours passed. One by one, ARX warships tried to flee, only to find escape routes cut off. When the final enemy ship burned and broke apart, Admiral Vance stood on the bridge watching the wreckage drift in the void. He did not smile. War brought no joy, only duty. The people of Veen 4 had been left to die by everyone else, but not by humanity, not ever by humanity. Because when one of their own cried out, humanity answered, and they answered with fire. The sky above Veen 4 was now filled with the burned-out hulls of ARX warships. On the surface, fire still burned and buildings lay in ruins. Bodies of both humans and ARX soldiers were scattered across the scorched ground. Admiral Vance stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, staring down at the destroyed landscape below. His hands clenched tight. Victory had come, but the price was steep. Thousands of colonists had died before help arrived. Entire cities had been leveled. Even in defeat, the ARX had made sure to leave deep scars. A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Captain Lee Monroe, his second officer. "The surviving soldiers are rounding up the last of the enemy prisoners. All resistance has ended." Vance nodded without changing his expression. Monroe continued, her voice heavy. "We've lost many soldiers, and there are still many dead civilians." Vance took a slow breath. "War always cost blood, but that didn't mean those deaths had to be meaningless." He turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to all survivors on the planet." A moment later, his voice reached every corner of the ruined world. "This is Admiral Elias Vance of the Terran Defense Fleet. The enemy has been defeated. Your world is free again. We came because no one else would. We came because humanity does not leave its people behind. We mourn those we could not save, but we stand with the living." And he paused, his voice turning cold and dangerous. "To the ARX, you believed no one would come. You were wrong, and you will never forget this." On the surface, survivors stumbled out from underground shelters and from beneath the rubble of collapsed buildings. Their clothes were dirty, their eyes hollow from exhaustion and fear. Some wept. Others could only stare in shock at the sight of Terran soldiers walking the streets, not as conquerors, but as rescuers. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, held her mother's hand as she watched soldiers clearing wreckage from a destroyed school. One soldier, his armor scratched and dented from battle, knelt beside her and pulled out a food bar. "Here, kid," he said roughly, holding it out to her. She hesitated, then took it. "Are they gone?" she asked. looking up at the sky where enemy ship debris still burned. "Yeah," the soldier said quietly. "They're gone." For the first time in weeks, she smiled, but humanity's war was far from over. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, the ARX Dominion struggled to understand what had just happened. No one had ever struck them so hard. No one had ever made them bleed like this. Their leader sat in shock, watching footage of their burning ships and fallen warriors. The ARX had never been afraid of anything, but now something had changed. "We thought they were weak and divided," one warlord said in disbelief. "We were certain they would ignore the colony like everyone else." Another warlord added bitterly, "We were wrong." The Supreme's warlord, a massive figure with cold black eyes, leaned forward. "Then we assumed incorrectly," he said, his voice quiet and deadly. "Humanity is not the broken, scattered species we believe them to be. They arrived when the entire galaxy abandoned these people, and they arrived ready for war." A heavy silence fell across the chamber. Finally, one of the warlords spoke. "We must prepare ourselves. Because if they would do this much for a single small colony, what will they do if we push them further?" The Supreme Warlord's hands clenched into fists, his eyes burning with both rage and something like respect. "They will come for us," he said, "and when they do, we must be ready." News of what had happened spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Political leaders, war councils, and powerful hidden players all reacted with shock and disbelief. No one had expected humans to respond. No one had believed they had the power, the will, or the nerve to launch such a deadly strike. But humans had not just responded. They had destroyed the entire ARX invasion force. An emergency meeting was called in the great halls of the Galactic Council. Leaders from all the major species sat in uncomfortable silence as battle footage from Veen 4 played across the central screen. The destruction was total. The ARX fleet, which everyone had assumed would crush the small colony easily, had been torn to pieces with terrifying skill. Chancellor Valen of the Zephyr Union rubbed his scaled forehead in confusion. "How did they do this?" he muttered. "They shouldn't have had the power, the technology, or the numbers." A deep voice cut through the air. All eyes turned to the ARX representative, Warlord Sithen. His dark eyes burned with barely controlled anger. His entire species had just suffered the worst humiliation in their history. "The Terrans were underestimated," he growled. "An error we will not repeat." A worried murmur spread through the room. The ARX Dominion was one of the most powerful military forces in all of known space. If they were planning revenge, the war that followed could break the fragile peace the Council had worked to protect for hundreds of years. "Let us not rush to judgment," Councillor Orvis of the Ciari Alliance said carefully. "Maybe this was just a one-time thing, an isolated moment of human aggression caused by an attack on their own people. We have long known them to be emotional and protective. This does not mean they are a real threat to the balance of power." Sithen's lip twisted in anger. "You are blind if you believe that," he snapped. "Look at what they did. 500 warships, soldiers in numbers we did not think they had. They crushed us, and when their admiral spoke to the survivors, he made it clear this was just the beginning." The room fell silent. Then from the shadows a new voice spoke. All eyes turned to High Speaker Luthen of the Veen Coalition. The Veen were an ancient people, known for their long memories and careful thinking. They had watched humanity more closely than anyone else. "We believed them to be chaotic and divided," Luthen said, his eyes narrowing, too busy fighting among themselves to ever be a real threat. "But we were wrong." He gestured to the screen where the Indomitable hovered over Veen 4 like a silent protector. "They are not split apart. They are united." They did not hesitate. They did not ask for permission. This is not the behavior of a weak species. A tense quiet stretched across the table. Finally, Chancellor Valen spoke in a low voice. "Then we must ask ourselves a question," he said, "a question that will shape the future of this entire galaxy." He looked around the room, his eyes heavy with unspoken fear. Are the humans our partners or our enemies? Back on Veen 4, surviving colonists worked alongside Terran soldiers rebuilding the ruins. Admiral Vance stood at the edge of the destroyed city, looking up at the Terran fleet still positioned in the sky. "This won't be the last time we do this," Captain Monroe said, standing beside him. Vance nodded silently. Monroe paused, then asked quietly, "What do you think the Council will do?" Vance exhaled slowly. "They'll talk and talk. They'll delay. They'll try to convince themselves we're still just a small, unimportant species." Then finally he turned to face her, his expression hard. "But the ARX won't wait. They'll come back. And next time, They won't just attack a colony. Monroe's face went pale. Earth, she said quietly. Vance didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. Veen 4 had been the spark. Now the real fire was coming. In the darkness of space, the ARX Dominion surviving ships carried a message of shame and vengeance back to their homeworld. Warlord Sithan stood before the great assembly of the Dominion, his body still bearing wounds from Veen 4. His pride was damaged far worse than his body. "We were wrong about humanity," he growled, his voice echoing through the war chamber. "We thought they were weak. We believed they would not come. We were wrong on both counts. And they brought with them a fire unlike anything we have ever encountered." A troubled murmur spread through the gathered warlords. The ARX took pride in being unstoppable conquerors, undefeated for countless centuries. But now the whispers of the galaxy spoke of their failure. A towering figure stepped forward, High Warlord Vathan, the supreme leader of the entire Dominion. His presence alone was enough to silence the room. He looked at Sithan, his expression unreadable. "You return in shame," Vathan said. "But shame is not the same as defeat. Tell me, what did you learn?" Sithan clenched his fists. "Yes, High Warlord," he said, taking a slow breath. "We misjudged them. Their technology is more advanced than we assumed. Their strategies are more clever than we expected. And worst of all," he tightened his jaw, "they are not afraid of us." Vathan remained silent for a long moment. Then slowly he spoke. "Good," he said. The room went still. "Fear creates weak enemies," the High Warlord continued. "I would rather fight a foe that is brave, a foe that bleeds, a foe that makes us stronger." His dark gaze swept across all the assembled warlords. But they must understand what comes next. Humanity has made their move. Now we make ours, Sithan straightened. "Then you authorize war?" Vathan smiled slowly like a predator. "Not yet." He turned to a nearby holographic map, where the sectors of space flickered in brilliant colors. "Humanity fights with emotion. They come running when their own are in danger. So we will not threaten their colonies. We will strike at the heart. We will make them fear for the homeworld they protect." Sithan stiffened as understanding dawned in his eyes. "Earth." "Yes," Vathan said simply. On the far edge of Terran space, on Earth itself, Admiral Vance stood on the bridge of the Indomitable watching as the first waves of new warships arrived. The fleet was growing rapidly. Humanity had been preparing for this conflict long before Veen 4. The moment the Galactic Council had abandoned the colony, the moment the major powers had written off humans as insignificant, humanity had known this day would come, and so they had prepared in secret. They had built new warships under the cover of defensive expansion. They had designed weapons the rest of the galaxy had never seen. They had trained soldiers for a war no one believed they could fight. Vance turned to Captain Monroe. "Status report? 20 new warships arrived from the Mars shipyards this morning," she said. "We're bringing them into the main fleet now. Ground forces are going through training drills. Morale is high. Everyone knows what's coming." Vance nodded. They all felt it. The feeling of something building in the air, the calm before the storm. Humanity had shown its strength. Now they waited for the response. "Do you think they'll attack the outer colonies again?" Monroe asked. Vance shook his head. "No." He exhaled, his eyes dark with certainty. "If I were leading them, I would go straight for Earth." Monroe's face hardened. "Then we need to be ready." Vance turned back to the massive window, watching his fleet prepare for the coming storm. They would be ready. Because when the ARX came, humanity would show them what true war meant. The ARX invasion fleet moved through space like a silent storm, its massive warships blocking out the stars as it advanced toward its target. This was not a raiding mission. They had not come for resources or distant colonies. They had come to end humanity before it could grow into a true galactic power. High Warlord Vathan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eclipse of Dominion, watching his fleet sail through the cold void. His expression was calm, but beneath it burned a hunger for revenge. "Time to target?" he asked. 3 standard days, one of his officers reported. "The human fleet is gathering in the Sol system. They are preparing for war." Vathan smiled darkly. "Let them prepare. This would not be a simple battle. This would be extinction." Back on Earth, the skies filled with movement. Massive space stations churned with activity as weapons were loaded onto massive battleships. Fighter jets screamed overhead, weaving between tall buildings that had been turned into defensive positions. Humanity had seen this coming, and they were ready. Admiral Vance stood in the war room deep beneath Geneva, surrounded by holographic images of the incoming ARX fleet. The enemy force was enormous. 2,000 warships, countless fighter craft, and enough firepower to reduce Earth to ash. The room was thick with tension. High-ranking officers, generals, and political leaders all stared at the glowing display, showing the red wave of enemy ships getting closer every moment. President Alan Graves broke the silence. "What's our best chance, Admiral?" Vance's voice was steady but grim. "They outnumber us 3-1. Their ships are bigger, better armored, and more powerful." A worried murmur spread through the room. "But they don't have our technology," Vance continued. "They don't have our tactics, and most importantly, they don't have our will to fight." Graves nodded slowly. "What's the strategy?" Vance stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. "We pull them in. We make them think they're winning." He gestured to the outer planets. "We make a show of fighting at Jupiter, give them blood but not a real victory. When they push forward thinking we're breaking, we spring the trap." New holograms appeared, showing hidden battle groups hidden behind the moon, buried under Mars's surface, waiting in the deep darkness beyond the system. "When they commit all their forces to the final assault on Earth, we cut off their escape route," Vance said, his voice like cold steel. "Sol will become a graveyard. They will come expecting to conquer. They will find death instead." The room was silent for a moment. Then slowly President Graves nodded. "Let's give them hell." 3 days later, the ARX fleet entered the Sol system and humanity was waiting. The ARX Armada poured into the Sol system like a wave of destruction. The size of their fleet was something few in the galaxy had ever witnessed. 2,000 warships, countless support ships, and weapons capable of turning Earth into molten slag. From the bridge of the Eclipse of Dominion, High Warlord Vathan watched as his forces swept past the gas giants. The weak human outposts on Jupiter's moons were destroyed in moments, their defenses falling apart under the sheer power of the Dominion's weapons. "Resistance is light," one of his officers reported. "Terran forces are pulling back toward Mars." Vathan let out a quiet laugh. "Good. Let them run. Let them feel helpless before us." But as his fleet pushed deeper into the system, something felt wrong. The humans were fighting back, yes, but not the way he expected. They weren't making a final stand at Jupiter or Mars. They weren't throwing their entire fleet into one desperate last battle. Instead, they were pulling back carefully and methodically, fighting just hard enough to slow the ARX advance before falling back again. Vathan's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a retreat. They were setting a trap. Deep inside the moon, in the hidden command center of Lunar Defense Station Aegis, Admiral Vance stood with his arms crossed, watching the battle play out in real time. The ARX was doing exactly what he needed them to do. Captain Monroe stood nearby, reading the tactical information. "They're pushing hard," she said. "We've lost the outer listening posts. Some of our stations in the asteroid belt have gone silent." "Acceptable losses," Vance replied calmly, his eyes locked on the massive red cluster representing the enemy fleet. "They're too focused on chasing us." "They think we're running scared," Monroe nodded. "And when they get too close?" Vance's lips curled into a thin smile. "We locked the door." Hours passed. The ARX reached Earth's orbit. The planet hung before them, beautiful and blue, its cities sparkling like jewels in the darkness. The homeworld of humanity, the prize that Vathan had come to claim. "It's over," he declared with a smile. "Begin preparing orbital bombardment. We will reduce this world to ashes." The command deck burst into activity. Orders flew across the communications network. Targeting systems locked onto major cities: New York, London, Beijing, Moscow. In minutes, the fleet would rain fire down and turn the planet into cinder. Then the alarm screamed. "What is happening?" an officer shouted. Vathan spun toward the tactical display, his eyes widening as hundreds of Terran warships erupted from hidden positions behind the moon, beneath Mars, and from deep space beyond Pluto. They weren't retreating. They had been hiding, waiting for this moment. "Impossible," someone shouted. Then a new voice cut through the bridge, deep and cold. "Vathan." The screen flickered, and suddenly Admiral Elias Vance was staring directly at the ARX warlord. "You fell right into it," Vance said. The human fleet opened fire, and the battle for Earth began. The void of space exploded into chaos and fire the moment the trap was sprung. Humanity struck with brutal precision. From behind the moon, from beneath Mars, from the shadows of deep space, warships surged forward. Their weapons unleashed a storm of destruction. ARX warships caught in tight formations were torn apart before they could even react. Mass drivers and railguns punched through thick armor like it was paper. Swarms of Terran fighter craft darted through the confusion, sliding between enemy defenses and unleashing deadly rounds directly into weak points. Admiral Vance watched from the bridge of the Indomitable, his face carved from stone as the battle unfolded. "They're trying to regroup," Captain Monroe said, her fingers flying across the tactical display. "We hit them too fast." "They can't organize, not fast enough," Vance replied coldly. "Keep the pressure on." No mercy. The ARX fleet reeled in confusion. High Warlord Vathan's fangs bared as the eclipse of Dominion shook violently, sparks cascading across the command deck. "Report," he roared. "Multiple capital ships destroyed. We're being surrounded. The humans were waiting for us." Vathan's mind raced. This wasn't the desperate defense of a dying species. This was a well-planned counter-assault. "We misjudged them," he growled, gripping the railing. "We saw them as weak. That was our error. But errors could be fixed." "Pull back the second and third battle groups," he ordered. "Regroup and push forward. Break their encirclement. Break them apart." His warlords hesitated. "But High Warlord," one said nervously, "our retreat is blocked." A sinking feeling washed over Vathan. He stared at the tactical display. Humanity's fleet had moved around them with frightening speed. Their escape routes were closed. Their forces were surrounded. The truth hit him hard. This wasn't a battle. This was a slaughter. Across the battlefield, Terran warships pressed forward without mercy, giving the enemy no quarter. Aboard the Indomitable, Vance watched as the enemy fleet broke apart. Their formations shattered. Their ships fired randomly and desperately, trying to carve an escape path that no longer existed. "This is it," Monroe said quietly. "They're done," Vance nodded. He opened a channel to the entire fleet. All ships attack without limit. A final wave of missiles and railgun fire crashed into the Dominion fleet. The massive ARX battleships, once symbols of their unstoppable power, were torn to shreds one by one, reduced to drifting metal in the void. Vathan's flagship, the Eclipse of Dominion, was the last to fall. As its burning hull spiraled down toward Earth's atmosphere, its final message echoed through the darkness. "We should have destroyed them before they became strong." Then, with a final explosion, the last remnants of the ARX invasion fleet ceased to exist. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never dismiss them again. The wreckage of the ARX fleet drifted silently in space, a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered hulls. The once great armada that had come to wipe humanity from existence had been utterly destroyed. On Earth, cheers erupted everywhere. From every city, every bunker, every military command center, people poured into the streets waving flags, embracing strangers, crying tears of joy and relief. From the war rooms of Geneva to the orbital stations that had barely survived the first attacks, the message was the same: humanity had won. But on the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Vance was not celebrating. He stood motionless, watching the tactical screens, his mind still processing what had just happened. The Dominion was powerful, brutal, merciless, and now they had suffered their worst defeat in history. Captain Monroe approached carefully. "Sir, the battle is over." "We did it," Vance exhaled, his jaw tightening. "No," he said quietly. "We won one battle. The war is just beginning." Monroe frowned. "You think they'll come back?" Vance turned to her, his expression grim. "We just humiliated one of the strongest empires in the galaxy. They won't accept this." He glanced at the wreckage floating in space. "Next time they won't just send a fleet. Next time they'll send everything." Monroe's face went pale. "What does that mean?" Vance met her eyes. "It means the real war is coming. Far beyond the Sol system, on the homeworld of the ARX, the Primarch of the Dominion, the supreme ruler of the entire empire, sat in his massive throne room. The walls were lined with banners celebrating past conquests. His 6 golden eyes glowed dimly as he heard the report from the one warlord who had survived the battle. "They fought unlike any species we have ever encountered," the warlord stammered, his voice shaking. "Their strategies, their ferocity. It was like they knew our every move before we made it." The Primarch's claws tapped slowly against his stone throne. "And what happened to High Warlord Vathan?" The warlord hesitated, then bowed low. "He is dead, my lord. His entire fleet is gone." The gathered warlords shifted uncomfortably, waiting for their ruler's response. Then slowly, the supreme leader of the ARX rose from his throne. His towering frame cast a shadow across the chamber. His power was undeniable, his presence suffocating. For countless centuries, no species had dared to stand against the Dominion. But now humanity had shattered that invincible image. They believed they were alone, the Primarch said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. They thought no one would come to save them. But when we arrived to conquer them, humanity's greatest armada appeared instead. His 6 golden eyes burned brighter. Very well. If they want war, then we will give them extinction. The ruler turned to his gathered warlords, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Then we shall bring them total destruction. The celebrations on Earth lasted for days, but Admiral Vance had no time to enjoy the victory. He knew the war was far from over. Inside the United Terran Command Center beneath Geneva, holographic displays showed disturbing intelligence reports. The news from deep space scouts and long-range probes told a terrifying story. The ARX Dominion was mobilizing. "We've been monitoring their communications," said Lieutenant Keto, the head of Terran intelligence. "The Dominion High Council is furious. They're calling humanity a plague that must be erased from existence." Vance crossed his arms, his face unreadable. "What are we looking at?" Keto made a gesture and the holographic display changed. A new armada materialized in the projection. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. "The Dominion isn't sending just another invasion force," Keto said grimly. "They're activating their entire military machine. Hundreds of thousands of warships. No, thousands. Massive dreadnoughts the size of cities. Siege platforms that could destroy entire continents. Weapons so advanced that even human scientists barely understood them." "This is a complete extinction campaign," Captain Monroe said quietly. "They don't just want to beat us anymore. They want us gone. They want to wipe us out entirely." Vance's jaw tightened. He had expected a response. He had expected revenge, but this was genocide on a scale the galaxy had never seen. President Graves, standing at the front of the room, took a deep breath. "What are our options?" Vance's voice was low but firm. "We fight." Graves's eyes narrowed. "Can we win?" Vance turned back to the hologram. The odds were impossible. Thousands of Dominion warships against the remains of Earth's battered fleet. And yet when he looked at the faces around the table, he saw only determination and courage. "We don't need to win," he said. "We just need to make them regret coming." The largest military force in ARX history began its journey toward Earth. At its head, aboard the flagship harbinger of extinction, stood the Primarch of the Dominion himself. He stared at the distant stars, his 6 golden eyes filled with cold rage. "Let the humans gather their fleet," he murmured. "Let them believe they have hope." His claws flexed as he spoke. "This time we do not stop until their world burns to nothing." And so the final war for humanity's survival began. The storm came faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, the Dominion's apocalyptic fleet surged toward the Sol system. The size of their numbers went beyond anything humanity had ever faced. Thousands of warships, siege platforms capable of turning planets to molten slag, swarms of hunter-killer ships designed to seek out and destroy survivors. Against them stood Earth's last line of defense. The United Terran Armada, battered but unbroken, assembled at the edge of the system. Every remaining warship, every station weapon, every defensive satellite was aimed at the approaching storm. Even old civilian cargo ships had been retrofitted with makeshift weapons. The people of Earth did not run. They did not surrender. They stood their ground. The Battle of Sol was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Dominion attacked with overwhelming force, but the Terran fleet fought like creatures born from fire itself. Human warships, outnumbered and outgunned, executed daring tactics that seemed impossible. Swarms of artificial intelligence-controlled drones filled space, slamming into Dominion vessels with deadly precision. Orbital stations rained nuclear fire down on the approaching enemy. And when the Dominion breached Mars's defense line, humanity deployed its final weapon. The Thanatos Protocol, that experimental dark matter weapons, forbidden by interstellar law, were detonated deep within the enemy fleet. Reality itself seemed to tear open as gravity distortion shredded hundreds of ARX warships. But even that was not enough. The Dominion pushed forward. They broke through Earth's first defenses. They conquered Mars. They reached Earth's orbit. Then humanity did what it had always done best. It adapted. Using hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and desperate last stands, human forces fought on even after the orbital stations fell. They kept fighting even as the space docks burned. Humanity refused to give up. Then, in one final act of defiance, Admiral Elias Vance led a suicide attack against the harbinger of extinction, the flagship of the Dominion Primarch himself. With his last breath, Vance detonated the Indomitable's reactor, taking the ARX leader with him. The Dominion fleet, now without leadership and bleeding from countless wounds, hesitated. And in that moment of uncertainty, humanity struck back with everything they had left, from hidden bunkers on Earth, from the last surviving warships, from the depths of the asteroid belt. Humanity attacked with every weapon they possessed. The once invincible ARX broke, and when the remains of their fleet fled, humanity simply watched them go. Years later, the marks of war still remained. Earth had been damaged, but it survived. The Dominion, once the greatest power in the galaxy, never recovered from their defeat. Other alien civilizations, no longer afraid, rose up in rebellion against the fading empire. The empire that had terrorized the stars for countless centuries began to collapse. Humanity did not just survive. They changed the fate of the entire galaxy. And so when future generations looked up at the stars, they did not see darkness and danger. They saw a future they had won through blood and determination. They saw a future earned by standing together when everything seemed lost. Because when the universe came to destroy them, when the Dominion believed Earth would stand alone when all hope seemed gone, Earth's greatest warriors arrived. They came with fire, they came with fury, and they came because humanity never abandons its own.